Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Next Gen Environmental Firm podcast. Today, I'm joined by Tariq Al Barwani, co-founder of STROM Futures, a specialist consultancy helping organizations navigate the evolving world of carbon markets and environmental commodities. Tariq, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Yoza. It's great to be here as well.
I'm really keen to learn more about the credits. And the fact is, I've been interviewing people and companies that actually build credits. And it's really complicated area. And I think I need to be repeated and taught maybe many times till I understand completely. And I will not understand because it's too complicated. So, okay, can I just say, is it okay to say STROM Futures or you say STROM?
Yeah.
Yes, STROM.
Yeah,
What does it stands for? STROM.
So it's a name that represents like a flow of energy. So transfer of energy, flow of energy from one space to another. So I thought it was very fitting for what we do, which is in the environmental space and brokering carbon credits or carbon, more namely carbon commodities or carbon products within the space. So I thought that was just like a very fitting name for what we do.
Okay, that's nice story behind that. So STROM Futures operates in very specialist niche. If you were to explain your business to a CEO in 5 minutes, how do you describe what you do?
I'll go back to maybe like you started off talking about project developers. So we don't get involved with any projects at all in terms of like, development or MRV or any aspect of that. So once a project is up and running and generating credits, right, that they'd like to monetize, where we step in. So we step in post generation of credits or environmental products. So our role to any company that's doing that is very particular. We only work mostly in our compliance space. We tend to do some voluntary stuff, which is primarily in the renewable energy certificates, so the REC space, but it's mostly compliance and obligation space which we work in. So how we help companies is that we sit in the middle of the both sides of the table, right? So we work with the project developers or entities that have found a way to cut emissions down below their benchmarks. And we work with as well entities that require credits from the market to meet their obligations on compliance base. So we're introductory brokers. We don't take any positions in the market, which means that we do not actually buy any carbon products at all from the market. We just simply have a deep bench of clients that we match from both sides of the table and then help them monetize credits or just basically reduce their cost of compliance by buying these credits from the market, which is typically a lot cheaper or at a discount to paying the tax that these Canadian entities are subject to. So we're very focused on the Canadian markets. We pay attention to what's going on, of course, in the European and American market, but our real bread and butter is the Canadian markets.
Do you work with particular companies, let's say energy, ethanol producers or something like this, or any type of overall companies that requires to buy credits or sell credits?
That's a great question. So we work with multiple types of that are participants in different programs. So across Canada, there's different jurisdictions or different provinces, and basically each province somewhat has their own market. And within each market, you have different rules about who can participate based off how much emissions they generate, right? So we work with anyone who's compelled or under compliance or obligated to be in these markets. So we work with those, and those look like, in reality, it's mostly energy companies, utility companies, industrials, right? Fuel providers. So those are in reality the ones we work with. We work with some data centers, but not quite a lot, and chemical companies. So these are kind of like your heavy emitting companies that we typically work with, as you can imagine. And we work with sometimes, anything from paper pulp companies as well. Sometimes they come into the mix, and we work with them as well. So the main determining factor is depending on which province or jurisdiction that we're in. We work with entities that are obligated under that particular jurisdiction or program that's being operated within that province, environmental program. And we, as long as, there's somebody who's looking to either monetize credits that they have or reduce their cost of compliance by purchasing credits from the market, which is important to make a note of, that usually they trade at a discount to whatever kind of what they call tax or headline price that they would be subject to if they didn't go to the secondary market to purchase them.
That's interesting. So, do you work with, let's say, you are in the middle of both, so who are buying and who are selling? So, do you work with nature based projects who actually, by building that project, and then eventually they will produce credits, right? Do you work with these companies as well, or you wait until they complete their project and decide these are the credits to sell?
So actually, we don't really work with too many nature-based projects. So we work with projects. So because of the compliance space that we're in, typical projects that we see are mostly depending on the province. Like British Columbia, there's some forestry projects that we work with. But as you move across the provinces, it's mostly, like your renewable space. So people who are generating renewable energy, industrials who are, for lack of a better word, more efficient at generating a unit of output. Hence, they're more efficient than a certain benchmark of their peers. We'll get too technical here, but they're just effectively more efficient at generating a unit of an output compared to their peers, and hence they're given these credits because of that for being able to improve on their efficiencies there and decarbonize. So we work with entities like that, and for projects specifically, mostly see renewable projects actually that come and work with. So your solars, your wind projects, your not as much hydro, but some of that as well.
So, for those who aren't familiar with carbon market,
Mhm.
why should business leaders be paying attention today?
Okay, it's a great question. So, first off, what kind of the carbon market really is. So, the carbon market is a financial mechanism that's created by legislation, usually within a certain jurisdiction, within a certain country, province, state, that allows pricing of emissions. So, you put a price on emissions. So, now that you have a price of emission, as a emitter of greenhouse gases, the value, quote unquote, of what you're emitting into the atmosphere, right? If you're emitting 100,000 tons a year and 1 ton of emissions worth green or GHG is worth $10 according to the province, you're now polluting $1 million a year, right? So it's very simple math there. So this is placed there as a mechanism to help stimulate and push for decarbonization of a certain and achieve this decarbonization goals that a certain jurisdiction or country is trying to achieve. So now, having said that, there's also a secondary market that's typically set up within these systems to allow entities that are within it to generate credits based off certain criteria, such as project development or being more efficient or being allocated, right? Some jurisdictions you actually allocated or provided these credits as part of the system. And it allows you to actually trade these with your peers. So your peers may be in a position where they're just not able to decarbonize as fast, not able to be just as efficient as everybody else, or just simply heavy emitters that they can find a way to either reduce the cost of compliance that's required with them in the jurisdiction, because these credits typically are at a lower cost than what we call here in Canadian markets headline price or the tax price, or it allows them to kind of mitigate whatever kind of emissions they have, and still ultimately you're reducing the cost of a compliance, basically. So if you're looking at the generation side, you're making whatever project you're building have an extra revenue flow into your line items. So if you're looking at your income statement, wherever you have a bunch of line items in terms of where you're generating money, the carbon credits you're creating from your projects is definitely something that you can add on. So that's one benefit. If you're a net user of credits, so you're now provides you an opportunity to reduce your cost of compliance because you're able to purchase these credits from your peers at a discounted price, which it typically goes for, or B, you're now purchasing more allowances or more leeway to be able to mitigate your emissions in the sense of you're allowed to now, for lack of a better word, match whatever kind of guardrails that the system has put for you in terms of your obligations for that particular year. You're now allowed to be within that, right? So whether it's a cap, whether it's a benchmark, there's different ways to do it, but that's essentially it. So business leaders who are subjected to this. So obviously, not every business will be subjected to this, but the business leaders who are running companies that are currently developing projects that are quote unquote green, and that falls within different definitions, but we'll go with that for now, or are heavy industrials, heavy emitters of greenhouse gases that they have obligated. Both of them need to pay attention to carbon markets because it could definitely save them costs in terms of their compliance costs or generate an extra revenue coming into their project.
Wow, that is complicated. It's
Uh, yeah. So going back to why should business leaders pay attention? Only I would say that, the ones who should definitely pay attention are the ones who are definitely involved in either A, the decarbonization or the electrification of the economy, right? Those who are kind of creating projects for that, building opportunities within economies for that, or those who are simply, part of industries that are known to be heavy emitters, such as whether it's like, your steel, your concrete, your oil and gas, your pulps, so all those kind of industries that are out there that are known to put out a lot of greenhouse gas into the air, into the atmosphere and environment. And they're obligated by certain provincial environmental regulations, then they have to definitely keep that in mind in terms of when they're operating, because that's A, they'll have to be in line with whatever obligations that environmental regulation has set for them. And B, they'll reduce their cost of compliance by paying attention to the markets.
That's very good. Now, I would like to bit back to about you and your company. So when it was this bulb moment and you said, you know what, I think we should create this consultancy, when did it happen?
Just to kind of just be clear, we're not really a consultancy, so we're more for brokerage, and we don't particularly provide, direction in terms of where companies should go. We put out a lot of information out there for factually in terms of what we're seeing and pricing dynamics and market dynamics and what legislation is being put out and our take on that. But we definitely don't provide, consulting services and drive companies towards a certain direction, right? So I just wanted to make that clear. So, well, what first was interesting. So, my previous background is an engineer, right? So, a surveyor. So, I used to work up northern Canada, up in the atmosphere, up in like beautiful environments. So, up in the forest, up in the tundra. And I really fell in love with being outdoors and being, in this whole green spaces that probably someone hasn't stepped foot in that patch of earth in like hundreds of years or something like that, right? So, I fell in love with that kind of like work. So, inadvertently, I got connected with the environment around me and environmental. No, I won't say I'm an environmentalist, but I gained like quite a bit of appreciation for it. So, and I was always interested in the markets and always interested in finance, and I was interested in like, trade. So that was also something that I was found interested in. So I was really intrigued when I found out there was an intersection of the two. So which was environmental markets, which I was completely taken away. I think most people will, if you told them that there's a price to greenhouse gas across or the price to carbon dioxide, right? They'd be like, "What? What do you mean by that? Like, how is there a price to air?" Right? So that was one of the things that like really struck me when I was told that. And once I found that out, I kind of fell into deep rabbit hole, learning more about it. And one thing led to another. I decided to start the business, and I saw that there was a lot of, there was opportunity in the Canadian market for a Canadian company come in and help entities that are in different jurisdictions. Someone that fully understands the country, the markets, and like being able to like actually walk up to our clients and shake their hands versus just simply emailing you from an office, somewhere half across the world, for example, right? So I think that we wanted to take advantage of the fact that we're locally based, focus in Canadian markets. I've worked in the oil and gas industry and under the lens of an engineer or surveyor. So I'm very familiar about the industry. So that was one of the first few things that came together for me to create the business.
So how long you been doing? By the way, thank you very much for clarification regarding the brokerage versus consultancies. Appreciate. So how long you been doing that, and what challenges you maybe experience at the beginning? And what challenges you see for the future with the carbon markets?
Okay, so we've been doing this for about 4 years now. And the initial challenges we faced is honestly typical of any business you start, right? Like, who are you, right? So, like, you're just, nobody really knows who you are. I had a few contacts that through my years in surveying, but in general, like, you're a new company, you got to build up that trust. You got to build up a clientele, right? So, people that you've done business for who can refer you or give you repeat business. So I think that was always hard in the first part of any business you start, right? Trying to get that going.
Right.
And our business was the same. I didn't experience that exact same kind of growing pains as any business does. At the moment, as time goes on, you get better and things get sharper. You kind of like, stub your toes a few times and you learn you learn where all the edges are, right? So those are a few things that you kind of get improve on and make it a point to like always deliver great service for your clients. So nothing really out of the ordinary, just things that you'd say that I would say that typical business will encounter at the beginning of its startup stage, right? But at the moment, going to your next question, which is what challenges do you foresee with environmental markets moving forward? That's correct. Is that your question?
Yeah, that's correct.
So here in Canada, I'm going to be very specific in the Canadian markets because that's something that we are looking at a lot. It's a great question because at the moment there was over the last, I would say over the last maybe 9, 10 months, there's been a bit of confusion in terms of, particularly in Alberta, there's been a bit of a back and forth between the federal and provincial governments in terms of how to implement the framework that the government has set. So the federal government sets a framework that all the jurisdictions should adhere to at a minimum, and then they can somewhat tweak it towards their province as needed, right? But there's a few things that you can't really budge in terms of pricing is one of them. It escalates every year, so it goes up every year. So those are like some of the things that are fixed in stone that each province should adopt. But then you can always add your own flavor to it as needed for your province. So there's been a bit of back and forth in terms of, Alberta and the federal government in terms of push and pull and give and take and adjusting the Alberta tier program towards its federal government. So I'll step back a little bit. The Alberta Tier program, which is an environmental program here in Canada, is by far, I'd say, the biggest program that's here. It's the one that we pay attention to most. So what happens there somewhat will set a bit of a tone to what happens in other provinces. So that's why I'm referring to Alberta here. So at the moment, there's been an agreement in terms of how some kind of sacrifices here and there that the federal government made and changes to their overall framework of the country to
Right.
adapt it somewhat to what Alberta wanted, which is great. That was good to see. But some of it is unclear, as legislation that hasn't been details haven't been provided yet for those changes. So it provides is the what that creates is a lot of uncertainty in terms of how things will look. Like 12 months from now in the program. So some of the results of that is a lot of people are, if you don't know what's going on, you kind of sit and do nothing. So the market kind of
Right.
slowed down quite a bit. So in a way, it provided clarity. In a way, it really slowed down the market, which is unfortunate for us as brokers, or at least people who are actively involved in the market. Because if you're we our business thrives off deal flow, and if there's not much deals going on, not much not much thriving going on there, right? So that's one of the main things that I'm noticing in terms of that. The good thing is that the environmental market is here to stay in Canada. Like that's been signaled and been strongly shown in terms of that they want the market to stay. But how it's going to look, what's it going to end up being in terms of its structure? Is there going to be a lot of deals? Is it just going to be people who come to the market just when compliance is required? So they meet their compliance and then go out of the market, Is there going to be any kind of trades going on throughout the market? Is that going to actually bring in other participants to come into the market who are not necessarily obligated entities, but are, let's say, speculators or banks or like hedge funds or something like that, where they can actually create some liquidity? That's something that I look at as well a lot from the market perspective. So those are more of the changes that we're seeing happen as we speak right now. Yeah, I think that it's as usual. The market is determined strongly by regulation and legislation and stroke of pen risk. So it keeps it interesting, right? Because you're always looking at what's going on and keeping your eyes in terms of where legislation is going, what the government's thinking.
Well, exactly. I would like to expand a little bit about this new regulations and let's say how will affect or affecting your brokerage. Is it like you mentioned about the deals a bit slowing down, right? But I believe once maybe clarity is there, it will pick up. So how do you see these regulations will affect of your brokerage?
Well, I would have to clarify and say that the regulations have not changed yet. It's more from a memorandum of understanding, but it's something that's going to be implemented. And
Okay.
what we're expecting it to be implemented is just the details of the implementation is what we're not sure about. So just to kind of put some clarity there, to be more specific. So for us as a brokerage, and to be honest, as much for any brokers out there, you really want to be able to have a market that is liquid, or that the people are looking to trade, looking to see get any kind of movement in the market where there's trade between buyers and sellers, generators and people who are net deficits. So That's a basic requirement for anyone who's looking to do more than just a compliance play, right, in the market. So, and which is like people, business like ours. So anything that affects that amount of trades that's happening within the market affects the business. So we really need there to be like deal flows, people looking to create deals. You need somewhat a unclarity in terms of pricing, so a lot of these markets can be brokered two ways. They're brokered either OTC, which is like kind of over the counter between the counterparties. They're brokered through an exchange, so like an exchange such as ICE or Nodal that's out there. They create their own platform for you to do your exchanges on, or you can work with brokers like ours to do that, right? So, given how the market is currently, price discovery is somewhat it's there, but it's not always there. You kind of need to work with brokers and other people to like understand what pricing is. That is key. But if that goes away and there's immediate price discovery, for example, in terms of like, you know, a exchange comes into the market and figures out how to really get the onboard everybody and they're all exchange and they're all trading on that, then yeah, that that's a very, very big negative for brokerages, right? That's something you definitely don't want. So those are two things that someone has to keep an eye out for, is that who is coming into the market? Are they like exchanges that are coming in to like, kind of take over your job, which is a lot of like the market dynamics and discovery. And people reach out to me for pricing all the time. People reach out to me in terms of what kind of trades are happening. If that part goes away, as a broker, it makes business very difficult.
Right. Now, while you were explaining that, it's actually, could you walk me through as well how these transactions are working? Because, I'm picturing this daily, let's say daily trading, right? On the, like, I don't know, Fidelity or wherever, right? How this carbon trading and carbon purchasing, buying works. How does it work, the system?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of exchanges that are available in the market. In the US market, it's a little bit different. It's a lot more, especially like California market, it's a lot more liquid. There's exchanges. You can go on literally on a screen, on an app, for lack of better words, and then be able to buy and sell on that particular screen or app, right? So picture it as, anyone who does kind of retail investing. So it's somewhat to that. You can buy and sell on that, right? A little bit more advanced, but that's kind of like a basic way for me to explain it. So then you have the other way, which we are part of, which is, or you can go the other way, which is they call OTC. So basically, if I'm a trader at company A and I know company B's trader, I can simply give him a call, let them know what I want. If they're willing to sell it at the price that I want, at the volume that I want, perfect. We just, shake hands, send over purchase sale agreement, and the exchange of credits is actually done on a registry. So these credits live on registries, and a registry, think of it as like a bank account, right? So if you owe someone money and you want to do a transfer, you take money from your bank account and you transfer it over, right? So this bank account or registries are effectively bank accounts for carbon credits or offsets. So you can do that, or you can simply, another way is to work with brokers such as myself, where let's say, I have a client come up to me and ask for a certain volume, vintage, a price point that they're willing to pay for. And, they want it either today or maybe next quarter, 2 quarters down the line. So whatever, those kind of details. And they would come to me and ask me for that. And I will just go out and source the exact volume that they're looking for and the exact kind of delivery and pricing, right? So there's always a negotiation, right? Obviously, you want to buy low and those want to sell high. So you kind of have to make a little medium there, right? So that's where we come in and help lubricate that, facilitate that for them. And once that deal is done, a similar process ensues where like they exchange their purchase sale agreement, and agree to the terms. And then once that's done and signed, they do the exchange on the registry.
Can it happen in one day? All of this, or it is more longer process?
If someone reaches me in the morning and they agree to it right away, and the purchase sale agreement is always the bottleneck, right? So
Okay.
I've definitely done a turnaround in a day. That's not the issue. The issue is the purchase sale agreement. Not everyone will accept a purchase sale agreement as is. That gets sent to them. They'll always want to add their own terms. That's typically what I see. I think that you could do it if you wanted to, in theory, if you accept someone's purchase sale agreement, right? If you're a company that's okay with what they're sent, then it probably could be done. But in reality, no, it takes at least a few days. It can even go up to a month. For the companies that are very used to buying in the market and they're very active, this could definitely be done in a few days. Yeah.
Okay, no, because it's like this is more of my own education. Is like, like carbon credits are not that's something you can touch, feel. They are
Mhm.
like described. I don't know, described objects that you put on the paper, right? So it's
Yeah.
not like money you can, take from the bank and yes, look, I have $1,000, but here's like
Yeah.
1,000 credits. They are nowhere found.
That's true. So that's why you need to have a registry to say that, you're effectively, the registry will be like, okay, from serial number 001 all the way to serial number 099, these are your credits, right?
Right.
So they exist in a database, basically. And they're ones and zeros. So they're effectively ones and zeros, right? There's no physical representation of these credits, but they exist in registry, and the registry is where you buy and sell, and obviously it keeps track in terms of the movement. So there's no double counting, all that kind of good stuff, right? To make sure that transactions are legitimate and you're not double counting, they're not being used again. And then that's also, at least within the Alberta registry, you can also usually retire them. You can just, there's a bunch of actions you can do, but the most important ones are the trade, buying and selling of them, and the retirement, which is the biggest functions that people probably use.
For retirement too?
Because you have to retire them.
Sorry, my misunderstanding. Okay, I thought it was like, they actually using this credit like for retirement, their retirement.
No, that'd be interesting. That'll be interesting. There'll be a whole other kind of worms there, but it just yeah. But the retirement, as you know, for the obligations, the carbon compliance obligations.
Okay. No, now it's clear. Okay. That's actually really interesting. Is like I just discovered a new finance as well, arena, which I was not aware fully. That's nice.
Yeah, so you can imagine how I felt the exact same thing when I first learned about this. I was just so intrigued, and that's what kind of drew me into this business.
Yeah, it's unique and it's really, specific. So you are in the intersection of regulations, finances, and commodity trading. Well, I will not say commodity, but it's trading, right? So when you work with the clients, what the biggest challenges your clients are experiencing? What you have to explain to them, or how it works? Is it education? Is it finances? What is this part that you are explaining to them? I understand you're not advising, you are
Mhm.
trading for them, with them, right? But what is the biggest challenge for you to explain what they try to achieve and what you're suggesting them to do?
Okay, so I'll start off with what most people do understand. So most people do understand, especially in their roles, the financial element of things, right? So the financial
Okay.
element, they know the time value of money, and as we move along, most people understand the mechanisms that guardrails the program, so that what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, what your obligations are, how to use the registry. So most people are fairly competent in that part. What is usually tricky is interpretation of new legislation, or such as the memorandum of understandings, interpretation what that means for the market dynamics. Is it going to increase supply, increase demands? Is it going to move pricing up, move pricing down? Is it going to make certain, batches of credits useless by certain times? So for lack, it's not that the lack of understanding of regulations. Just usually these things are complicated, and you have to be looking at multiple scenarios that could come out of this regulation, and kind of understand, okay, if scenario A happens, this may happen, scenario B happens, this other thing might happen, right? So that's one of the challenges I think that people like to reach out to me for. It's always great to have your theory, and then to either speak to somebody else to either going to solidify it, or kind of like, shake it a little bit, or provide a different interpretation that you can kind of make your theory more robust. So that's what I find. And then another thing is like when news comes out, right? So like for example, let's say here in Alberta, they're looking to build the pipeline from Alberta to the BC to export to international markets, right? To this pipeline. So now that, for example, and this is like actually new news now that that's been approved, what does that mean? What does it mean for like the carbon market? What does it mean for supply, for the demand? What does it mean for entities that are involved in this export markets? They're now going to ramp up. Okay, what does that mean for credits? So you got to think through a few layers of to go through that. And a lot of people like to approach to the same thing, is that they'll have a theory, they'll have an understanding of where things are going, and would like, someone in the industry as their peer to talk about it, right? So as a broker, I have a unique kind of perspective, in the sense that I chat with a lot of people. So I chat a lot of people in industry, and I kind of have different narratives, different interpretations of things going on. and that provides a unique perspective, right, on where things might be, and people like to talk to me about that. So it's usually whenever there's a regulatory change or news of major project economical changes that are happening in the country that will affect industries and hence affect supply and demand of credits and carbon markets.
I was just wondering, this is can be off record, but it's like again, like day transaction, it can be from $100 to whatever, what is the credit transaction is, like average or is starting from to, just to have an idea.
Honestly, it depends from year to year because, like any market, the price varies. So at the moment, Alberta carbon credits are at $30, right? And your
Okay.
average transaction is anywhere from 25,000 to 50,000, let's say. So let's go on the low end. So at 25,000, you're looking at $750,000 for the transaction, right? So that's 30 times the 25,000 there. That would be like the price or the total price of the transaction. So it really depends. If you go on the higher end of 50,000 that I typically see, that'd be twice that, right? So that'd be 1.5 million. When prices were higher, I would see closer to the $2 million range in terms of trades or value of the PSA. So one way to look at it is the thing that's kind of in time in a way or kind of fixed is usually trades I see are about 25,000 to 50,000 volume. And then you can use that and multiply it by your price of credit at that point in time.
Is the credit can be bought by, maybe it's not worth it. Okay, I don't understand maybe exactly how it works. Obviously, I don't. But just general public. Can let's say I have 2 million in my bank account. I want to buy and purchase. It's working or no? It's not working so simple.
Great question, and it goes back to which province you're in, right? So in Alberta, if you have an Alberta Corp that is Alberta Corporation that is incorporated in the province, and you're registered on the registry, which you could technically do that. You could actually go on and purchase credits. It'll be a bit challenging because they'll be like, "Who is Yolanda?" They'll probably make you pay up front, just because you probably wouldn't pass like a know your customer or a anti-money laundering check, right? So there's always
Okay.
like they'll firstly check who you are, right, to do business with, right? So your biggest speed bump there would be definitely credits, right? So once they do a credit check on you, they'll be like, okay, who is right? So they might so they'll probably so if they agree to deal with you, they'll definitely make you pay everything up front, so before they transact. But in theory, yes, you could do that.
Okay,
In
well, it's good to
practice,
know.
in
Maybe when I
practice,
have 2 million.
in practice, there's going to be a few speed bumps. But yes, in theory.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Well, I have a last question. So, what do you see carbon market evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Once again, in the Canadian context, like the right now is very fractured. So each province has its own form of that carbon of market. So as I said, the federal government has implemented a framework that all provinces should adopt. So everything from pricing to escalation, how it lifts up to like frameworks that govern, how you transact, like having a registry and all that kind of stuff. So those are important to adhere to. But other than that, each province has its own flavor and its own pricing. So carbon in Canada is priced differently. It can be $30 in Alberta. It's about $77 in BC, can be probably like $80, around $80, $85 in Ontario, right? So you can see it's a big disparity. So one thing that, I think that a lot of people are looking to see happen is a pan-Canadian or national carbon market. So that's the one thing that I think that I hope is being worked on and being created and moving towards that direction. Another thing that is, as I mentioned, a lot of them provinces have their own kind of flavors, but a lot of them do not necessarily fully comply with the framework, which makes it a challenge for people to be in that market, right? So I think that getting more in line with the federal OBPS or output-based pricing system is what the federal regulation and framework is. I think that's one thing that's really important is for these jurisdictions to actually become more in line with the federal framework. So this from the Canadian context. So these are things that really needs to be worked on. And up until I would say a few months ago, we didn't know how long this program is going to go off to. So at least now we have certainty that 2040, at least it goes until that date because we were provided guidance until that date in terms of pricing. So those as a minimum, I think is what needs to be worked on, at least across Canada. And then within each province has its quirks. So it's too much to go through, right? But like as a whole system, those are important things to work on.
Well, it keeps you busy, that's for sure.
Yeah, it does. And it's fun though, I mean, each system is different, we didn't even talk about the low carbon fuel space, which is something that's a different kind of market, but which for transportation fuels, we just covered.
Please, could you expand because I was not aware of that. So please, what is about?
So the LCFS or low carbon fuel standards or space it's let me think of a good, easy way to explain this. So basically, we are used to using diesel and gasoline for transportation, right?
Right.
As you know, diesel and gasoline, not exactly the best fuel for transportation. People have done their best with catalytic converters and all that kind of stuff and and removal of lead to make them cleaner. But still, there's the cars and transportation, and not just cars, trucks, airplanes, so all these kind of vehicles that move people and goods around the province of the world generate a lot of emissions. So what the low carbon fuel standard is a program or a regulation or a framework to create fuel that is low in carbon intensity, right? So that you want to reduce the carbon intensity of these fuels. So perfect example I think most people should be aware of is gasoline and adding ethanol to that, right? So adding like your ethanol, which is more for renewable fuel, right? Reduces your hydrocarbon fuel of gasoline so that the carbon intensity over that certain liter of that fuel is now less. Same thing with diesel, right? So with diesel, you can create, let's say, HDRD, which is, I'm not going to try and remember what the acronym is, but basically it's generated from feedstock, right? And such as vegetables, cooking oils, and the kind of stuff they generated from there and create diesel that is called biodiesel or biofuel called HDRD that can be used as a drop-in fuel. So it's a little bit different to gasoline where you have to add, 10% ethanol and run it in the machine. But this actual generated or synthesized biofuel can actually full on replace diesel. And it's an extremely low carbon intensity fuel just because of it's created from organic material like fuels, feedstocks, soybeans, oil, all that kind of stuff. So that's not necessarily my expertise that is the creation of it. But what these do is that because they create you as a producer, let's say you create ethanol or you transport low carbon low carbon intensity gasoline with ethanol blended into that, or you create HDRD biofuels, or you transport it, because you're doing that activity, by the system allows you to create these credits as well. So these credits are now created because you are involved in either generation or the transportation of low carbon intensity fuels. And it's similar idea in the sense that your baseline carbon intensity is your, let's say for gasoline, it's your pure gasoline, for example, right? At a certain given date. So it's a little bit more complex, to be honest, than what I previously talked about, but effectively you're given a certain carbon intensity for a certain fuel that you have to beat, right? Otherwise, you're going to be in a deficit. So it's almost like the carbon intensity of benchmark. Any fuel that you create that below that, you start generating credits by that delta, that difference, right? And the less carbon intense your fuel that you're transporting or generating, the more carbon credits that you generate into your pockets, basically, and then you can use that to monetize.
Hydrogen as well is included in this kind of this
Yes.
or
Yeah. Hydrogen and electricity are both included in that. At least in the North American ones that I'm aware of, they are included in that. So yeah, and there's different classes, right? So in the Canadian fuel regulations, which is called the CFR, you have CC3, which is your advanced technology, which includes your electric vehicles, electric charging stations. Hydrogen could be included in there as well. You have your CC2, which is what most people are familiar with, which is your gasoline, ethanol blends, your HDRD or biodiesel that I described there to you earlier on. So those form those category. And even to make it more complicated, there's gas such as RNG, so CC2 gaseous, which is RNG, that can be used for transportation, or CC2 liquids, such as, and those liquids are what I just mentioned, which is gasoline blends and HDRD or biodiesel. So this LCFS programs, they exist to drive lower carbon intense fuels within the economy. That's the main goal of that program. I don't know if they want to say call them sister programs, but they both go hand in hand within an economy to decarbonize an economy. So you're decarbonizing the fuel that is used for transportation within the economy, and you're decarbonizing these processes that create products, and within the economy through the carbon credits.
I would think that this part actually is starting picking up because what's happening in the world, or not, kind of to creating these decarbonized fuels.
Okay, so there is a pickup. There's definitely a lot of interest in it. So, like, whether it's SAF, sustainable aviation fuels, there's lots of companies that I think particularly we've already been doing gasoline blends, ethanol blends, right? That's not really something too new there. But, making HDRD or biodiesel, which are two different things, but making them more economical to produce. So there definitely is projects to do that. Electric vehicles, as we know, is also something there's a push for. But, in reality, at the moment, I think there's a bit less of a push for the EV vehicles, a bit less, right? It kind of interest kind of dropped there. And there is concern, of course, in terms of, at least in the Canadian economy, we do have a lot of oil, kind of best that resource there. So it's tricky because overall, you kind of want to pull that out and monetize that, as an economy to obviously bring wealth into the economy, right? That's naturally. You don't want any kind of programs that like put a speed block or a wall in front of that. So going back to your question, is there a push for it? Yes. At the moment, given what's going on in terms of how quick fuels insecurity could pop up, I think hard to say, but I mean, I would say that takes priority over having clean transportation fuels. So no, it hasn't been shown, but it just kind of makes sense, right? You want a healthy economy, right? You want to be able to have an economy that provides jobs for people and builds the wealth of its citizens versus, if you kind of have to put low carbon intense fuels on the back burner for a while, I think that's a very easy, a very easy decision for like to be done, to be honest.
Let's say 20 years ago, was this something, because this is more and more, right? It's like overall, it's not just about the fuel, these carbon credits, people creating projects and et cetera, et cetera. So 20 years ago, there wasn't so much, right? Was it predicted that it will happen in the future, all of these credits? Maybe it was already 20 years ago, system set up.
Yeah, it's been around for a while, actually. At least it's been around in some form, right? Not necessarily in the advanced form it is right now, but this isn't really new. It's been around at least, I'm pretty sure, at least 70s and 80s, people were talking about this and thinking about it. So it's not really new. It's just its complexity, its depth, its breadth, and what it covers. Its nature has changed to be more visible right now. But it's always been around.
Yeah. Okay. So when they started talking, right, or thinking
Yeah,
about
yeah,
this, but
yeah.
actual implementation and actual running like you do right now, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't like that before.
No, it wasn't. It was a very specialized, like very specialized idea, right? It took a while to catch on. And then as with the Paris Accords and like that's kind of like, also helped solidify a lot of these environmental markets in the world, right? So and commitments to decarbonizations, hitting net zero, all these things kind of were foundations to really solidify this as an actual real concept and idea and paradigm and market that can be established in different countries.
Okay, that's interesting.
It is picking up, but as I said, it's not, it's not like the difference between this and let's say, I don't know, grains, right? Like wheat. So you need wheats, right? Like, I mean, by nature, there's always going to be a pull for, commodities such as wheat because we got to eat, right? We got to make bread, we got to make all these kind of products that derive from wheat. But carbon markets, there's no real need in a I mean, there's no real need for it by inherent need for it. The rug can easily be pulled from out of it by simply a legislator saying, or at least like, a new government saying that this does not serve our purpose anymore. And then it's gone. So there's no, and there's no one really have to pull that to bring that back, as opposed to like some other commodity or traded commodity that, such as wheat, as I said, like, it's always going to be a need. There's always going to be to eat for it. There's an inherent need for it. That's always be there. So it's a bit of a unique market in that sense, you know?
Yeah, no, that it is unique. So, Tariq, you honestly, thank you for explaining very clearly about this. It was really out as the masterclass for me about the carbon credits. I really would wanted to look into this in more details, but I would like to thank you for coming and joining today me on the podcast, explaining clearly and showing your as well expertise and how much you already contributed as well in how you're working. So I appreciate for your today, and thanks for everyone listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.